Come with me to a magical place where being labeled the Pork Queen is a compliment, where being nice is just a way of life, and where all leaders of the free world must pass through. Welcome to Iowa. Whether you're a current Iowan, an Iowa expat, or an Iowan at heart, this show is for you. This is the Iowa Podcast. Real Iowans, real talk, no drama. From the Brady Dental Care Studio, I'm Justin Brady, and as the leaves turn, you're probably wondering, where are the best locations to really take it all in? Well, that's what we're talking about today, among other things. We're going to talk all about Iowa parks, and to do that, Sally Ortgies has joined us. Sally, thanks for coming in the studio. Do we just call you the Iowa Park Lady? Can we call you that?
I think you can. I think that's, pretty much what I go by these days.
Now, is that like your Instagram handle or something?
It is. Yeah. It is.
Now, I actually found you because one of my family members is a loyal follower of yours on Instagram. And so she sent me your Instagram page and said, get her on. Get her on. This would be a great show. So that's how I found you. So thank you for so much for coming in the studio. We're going to talk about all Iowa parks. Well, most of them anyway, it sounds like, because you've hit so many of them. Before we do that, this is your reminder that we're on X, Spotify, Apple. For those that don't know, X, formerly known as Twitter, Apple, iHeart. We're on all the apps, so if you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe. What that does is every time we get a new show, every time we push a new show up with a fascinating Iowan, your phone tells you. That's what subscribing does. Your phone tells you, hey, there's a new show you can go listen to, so it's constantly being served up to you every week. And as a reminder, go to iowapodcast.com. We put links and photos and all the fun stuff there as well. Sally, thank you so much for coming in the studio. So, I mean, all parks? Are we going after, is this the eventual goal, all parks? Because I know that you have everything categorized from state to county, but you started out this journey of visiting every state park, right?
That's right. And my background is actually in city parks because I worked for West Des Moines Parks and Recreation for 34 years before retiring in March of this year. And but during that time, my husband and I started a state park journey back in 2019, fall of 2019, thinking that we were going to celebrate the 100th anniversary of all of the state park system, which was going to be taking place in 2020. And so we got a little head start on that, had the goal of visiting every state park in 2020, so during that anniversary year. And then the pandemic hit, and every celebration that was supposed to happen in 2020 was canceled in the state parks. But we took it as this great opportunity to get outdoors during lockdown. And our sanity depended upon these weekend trips to state parks. We ended up finishing up in 2021, so it took, about a year and a half to get to every state park. But we had the best time. It took us to every part of Iowa. Sure. I mean, you're going to every corner of the state. Most state parks are on paved roads, so it wasn't a true adventure. But we just had the best time. And it was about that time then I decided, I need to share about these places with our fellow Iowans. Because I would talk about a park and they'd be like, I've never heard of that park. Oh. Well, let me tell you. And so I started then my Instagram and called it Iowa Park Lady.
Now, wait a minute. You started this after you were already on the journey?
It was towards the beginning.
Oh, okay. Got it. Because you were starting to tell people what you were up to, and they're like, you should be posting about this.
Right.
Oh,
yep. Our first park was Pamel State Park down by Winterset. So I posted about that one for the first time.
Now, this is interesting. You mentioned that the original plan was to hit all of them on the 100th anniversary of what now? And then I have a follow-up question to that, too. But what was the 100th anniversary of what exactly?
Of the state park system in Iowa.
Oh, the state park system.
Yes.
Oh, so this is, I mean, I guess overall history, a relatively new thing.
Right. 100 years old, little over now. And the first state park was Backbone State Park over in eastern Iowa.
Really? 100 years, my word. So what does that mean exactly? 100 years of the state parks, like they were legally protected and defined 100 years ago? Is that what that means exactly?
Right.
Okay.
So the very first state park was established in 1920.
Mm-hmm. Really? Yep. And okay, what does that look like then? Like it was boards were established, local laws were decided by the state house. What does that look like?
Right. Right. So, the state park system involves the state legislature. Mm-hmm. There was a parks commission that was established. And then, over time, they just, gradually just started either purchasing land. In some cases, it might have been donated. And parks then were just continually added to the system. And the number of state parks varies depending on
my next question,
who you ask.
Oh, really?
That was one thing that we found a little troublesome. And we drew the line at visiting, like all of the wildlife areas and, some of those more remote, obscure places. But in our minds, there are 93 state parks and recreation areas.
My. Did you know that when you made the announcement the first time?
Yeah, we had a pretty good idea of that. But yeah, my next little adventure that I'm on right now, that was a different story.
Okay, we're going to get into the next adventure here in a bit. But yeah, it sounds like, that is a lot, 90 some parks. It's almost have enough state parks as counties in Iowa.
Right.
So, and you mentioned that took you to all corners of the state. Yeah. So let's go into that too then. Like, how many county parks are there then?
Well, that was a number that I did not know until after I announced in June that I was going to visit every county park in Iowa.
Okay. I think I know where this is going, Sally.
And so I did a little video. I was out at Brenton Arboretum, which is, I love that place, out by Dallas Center. People have to go there. But I was out there and I was filming this little video and announcing I was going to start a new adventure going to every county park in Iowa. And then I got home and I thought, I should probably just find out how many there are.
Okay.
And found out that there are 1,850 county parks.
Wow. Now, are all these paved?
No,
okay.
They are not.
So it's time to get the four-wheel drive ready. Hopefully you have
It's good I've got a Toyota 4Runner to get me around, yes. So and brand new tires.
Yeah. Have you run the math on how long that's going to take?
I have no idea. My husband, he was like, that's going to take you the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I hope I live a long, healthy life, so I guess if it takes years, it takes years.
Yeah, according to the research, if you're walking in parks all the time, you will live a long, healthy life.
Nature is good.
Yeah. It's so funny. We're only recently learning the science behind like walking through parks and what that does to your brain, how it prevents aging, how it's healthy. Like, we haven't known that traditionally. All we've had is anecdotal, I feel better when I walk through nature.
Right.
But we didn't have much else than that. We didn't have anything more than that. Of course, now recently, and I'm not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination, but only recently have we been understanding that walks through nature are so good for your mental health. They're so good for your physical health. We didn't know that. Now we know that. So if this is kind of one of the big antidotes to physical and emotional health is go walk through some parks.
Yes,
it's not a fix-all, but my goodness, it's a helper.
Oh, yeah. I had a stressful weekend with some family health stuff going on, and I just was like, I got to get out of here. And I took off for Guthrie County yesterday alone and hiked in 2 different parks and felt like a new person.
So how many, like you mentioned, there are parks, there are state parks, there are county parks. I imagine you obviously used to work for city park system, Park and Rec of West Des Moines. Do you know how many total like natural park areas are in the state then? Because you mentioned like there are over 1,800 county parks, something like that. Do you know how many overall natural park-ish areas we have in the state? I don't even know if that's possible to count.
Yeah. I mean, I'm the Iowa Park lady, but I don't have that number on the top of my head.
So I think one of the things that Iowa always takes criticism for, simply because primarily 3580 run through flat parts of the state. I think we take a lot of criticism for being like flat and boring, and there's not much here. But I think you'd probably disagree with that assessment.
Oh, I totally disagree with that. And I mean, just take Guthrie County yesterday. I mean, some of the hills out there are crazy, and you wouldn't see them if you're on the interstate.
This is northwestern kind of.
Yeah,
Iowa?
North and west of here. Yeah. Yep. And you just get out on some of these gravel roads, and it's like a roller coaster.
Right.
I mean, even yesterday, I kind of came up over one, and I kind of went, "Whoa!"
Yeah.
Like they're steep. And yeah, you just don't see that if you stay on the interstates.
Yeah, I've been up there, and you're absolutely right. It's a bit shocking because once you get off 80, so is it like north of Stewart a little bit?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Stewart, Panora, Guthrie Center, up in there.
Yeah, and you start to head up that direction, and you're right. It's really like a roller coaster. Or you get to Ames, and you have the ledges, or that's probably. I live in Des Moines, so that's the one I think of.
Right.
But,
right. Yeah, a lot of geological formations, and just the different vegetation types, and it's good to get out of the city. It's good to get off the pavement and just get out and explore.
Now, because right now, I think most people are familiar with Iowa because of the farmland, the flat areas. Did it always look like that, though? Is it like, did Iowa always have just these flat areas everywhere? I don't know if you know the history of Iowa, but, or were there like bunches of trees? Did we flatten things over time? How has Iowa changed over the years?
I'm not sure that we flattened things, but we definitely changed the vegetation. So, 97% of Iowa's landscape has been transformed.
What?
So, it's been made into cities and roads.
97%?
Yes.
That's like the whole state,
and mostly
basically.
Agriculture, of course.
Wow.
And that agriculture is really just two species, if you think about it. It's corn and it's beans.
Yeah, wow.
And before that, in the 1800s and prior to, it would have been mostly tallgrass prairie, which is super diverse. I mean, if you go out into a true native stand of tallgrass prairie, which there's only like 0.1% of the prairie left in Iowa that can be called true, native prairie. It is so diverse. Someone might look at it and say, "Oh, it's just a bunch of grass." Well, there can be hundreds of species all in that one area. And I'm finding those places as I travel to, those areas that have never been touched by a plow. And the sad part is they're really small. So you can never get the feel for what it would have been like, back before settlement. But it just makes them that much more rare and precious. And I think that's the real reason that I'm doing this Iowa Park Lady thing, is that I want to help people realize that these places exist in our state, even though you have to look for them, and that we should really treasure the ones that we have.
What are what would you say? And that's really interesting because I have seen the Iowa grasslands. I couldn't tell you why, but I know I've seen them, and I'm like, oh man, I wish there was more of this. So apparently there was more of this at one point. If you could nail it down, and maybe this is a difficult question, but what are the corners of Iowa kind of known for? You mentioned kind of the little bit northwest. I wouldn't call it northwestern Iowa, but you were right. And but is like you got the hills there. You kind of have the river system in the northeast side of the state. Do they all have their own little special thing, like the corners of the state? And what would that be?
Oh, yeah, I think they do. Like northeast Iowa is known as the driftless region. So it was not impacted by glaciers. And so you get a whole different landform there than anywhere else in the state. Northwest, I think, is interesting. There's a state preserve, I think there's what it is. It's not a state park, it's a state preserve called Gitche Manitou. And there you'll find like this ancient pink granite rock that
really
doesn't exist anywhere else in the state, or at least it's not exposed.
Huh.
And then southwest is my favorite state park, which is Waubonsee State Park. And that is in the Luss Hills of Iowa, which run all the way from just north of Sioux City down into Missouri. And the Luss Hills are only found in one of two places. One is in Iowa, the other is in China.
Now, okay, so I've heard of the Luss Hills. I don't think I've actually been there. And so you mentioned that was kind of southwestern Iowa. I want to go to that topic real quick, though. Can we cover southeast Iowa? Do they have anything unique?
Southeast, I would say, is a lot about the river, the Mississippi River. Yeah. A lot of forested areas, so you kind of get out of that more open prairie type landscape, and get into that more hardwood forest.
I would guess that, and I don't know this, but I would guess that the reason 3580 exists is because Des Moines was right there. It was a city that could support traffic, and that it just happens that right through the middle of the state there are some flatter areas to put an interstate system. And so that's what people see, but they don't actually get through all of Iowa, which, as you point out, is very shockingly diverse from a topographical standpoint, right? And so now I want to go back because you mentioned that's your what was the park in southwestern Iowa that's your favorite?
Waubonsee State Park.
Yeah, and so you mentioned the Luss Hills are there. Am I saying that right?
Luss.
Luss.
Yes, not Lois.
Not
like
Lois.
Your favorite aunt.
So Luss Hills. What is that exactly for someone who's never seen it? What does that mean? Is it like, what does it look like?
It is okay. So if you're coming from the west, the hills are just this dramatic change in elevation. So they kind of look like a bluff, kind of sitting up above the Missouri River Valley. And, so you have this super flat, wide Missouri River Valley, and then this sudden incline up into the Luss Hills. And they were created, many, many years ago by the wind blowing this really lightweight Luss soil off of that river valley and then depositing the soil. And they're up to 350 feet high.
Oh, my. So it's like that similar scientific principle when you're trying to like level out grass and you put like a little bit of fine silt or sand or whatever they do and they slowly level. Basically, the Luss Hills were created by a very high-speed version of that.
Yeah, just wind-blown soil is what makes up the Luss Hills.
Interesting. How long, you said this stretches down into
Missouri.
Really? Mm-hmm. Wow. And now tell me this, like you mentioned the only landmass that looks similar is in, I don't even know how to pronounce that, Shaanxi? Is that what you said?
I think that sounds good.
Thank you, Sally. Next time we'll have pronunciation in Chinese on the Iowa podcast. We'll figure out how to pronounce Chinese words. So that's the only other landmass like this in the world? Or
yes, that has, less soil exists in other places, but in this depth, that's the only other place.
Have you been there?
Oh, I've been there.
You
yes.
have? Really?
Oh, yeah. Just like in the last month, I've been there twice.
Oh, to the park.
Oh, to the park?
Yeah. To the Lost Hills, you've been there. I was wondering if you've been to the place in China.
Oh, no. No, they don't let me out of Iowa.
They don't let you. You were the Iowa Park lady.
That's right. I can only stay within the confines of our own state.
They have your passport stamped at the Iowa airports or something. That's super funny. That's really interesting. No, I didn't know we kind of shared that with our friends in China. That's fascinating. So, what's your I would assume that's your favorite state park. So
yes, it is.
And you've just started the county park thing.
Right.
Do you have a favorite yet? Because obviously, I'll have to ask you that question 5 years from now.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I go to every county and then I'm like, oh, yeah, that's my favorite.
Oh.
I mean, I think one that does stand out to me, and this is kind of an odd one because it doesn't really have any natural resources to speak of, which is usually what I'm attracted to. Mm-hmm. But I'm also finding I'm liking these little cultural and historical tidbits that I find along the way. Mm-hmm. And one that stands out to me is called Hopeville Square Park. And I went there on this kind of rainy, stormy summer day. It's in Clark County, so south of here. Think Osceola. Mm-hmm. Osceola is the county seat. And it's in this abandoned ghost town called Hopeville.
What?
And the people of Hopeville, it used to be a bustling little town, and they were hoping that the railroad would come through.
Oh.
The railroad didn't come through. And over time, it just ended up becoming abandoned. But they kept this little town square park, and somehow that ended up in the hands of Clark County Conservation. And something about the day I was there, it was just the weather was such, and it just had this feel to it. I was just loving how it felt. And then I did research, which I do research on all these parks too and find little things out. But they have the Hopeville Rural Music Reunion there.
Really?
Every Sunday after Labor Day. Every year. This was the 44th year that they've had this music reunion there in this little town square. And I'm like, we're going. I want to check this out. It was the coolest, most wholesome, best way to spend a Sunday that I've ever. I mean, and homemade pie. I mean, the music, it was just like all these local musicians could just come up and do their thing. So, that's what I'm finding too. Like, I'm going to these parks for the park itself, but then I'm finding there are a ton of follow-up experiences that I'll probably never have time to do all of them. But it's that follow-up that sometimes is just as important as the first visit. Yeah,
I mean, it's essentially it was an abandoned town, but it's not abandoned now, though, is what it sounds like. Or do people just kind of come back?
It's pretty abandoned.
So people come back to this town just for fun.
Yeah.
So it's people that it pulls from like neighboring towns that come in for these little festivals.
Yeah. And, people that maybe had family ties there. We ran into our neighbors who live across the street from us.
All the way over there.
Surprisingly. Huh. And she grew up there. She'd grown up in Hopeville.
Really?
And she looked at us, she's like, what are you doing here?
Is it like an empty main street with like tumbleweeds going through it? Is it kind of preserved, or is it boarded up? What does it look like then?
It just looks abandoned.
That is so funny.
I mean, there are a few people that still live, around there, and that's their home, so I respect that. But yeah, the town itself is no longer.
That's interesting. Waiting for the railroad. Never came.
And then you have this little county park just right there.
And you called it a ghost town. Do they do ghost tours?
I don't know.
I'm just curious about that. What other county parks are kind of top on your list right now?
Oh, I also have enjoyed Denison Prairie in Shelby County. And I think that one stands out because it's my home county. I grew up in the little town of Elkhorn in Shelby County. But I had no idea Denison Prairie existed. And so my sister went along on that trip, and we picked up a high school friend of ours. And, you know, none of us had even been to half the county parks in Shelby County, even though we had lived there, you know, for 18 years of our lives. And so I think that's another thing that I'm finding as I take people along with me. I love going alone. Like yesterday was definitely the day I needed to be alone, but it's also been fun to take people along. And, you know, I'm finding people that have lived in these counties their entire life have no idea these places are there.
Oh, and because we kind of fall into our own patterns, don't we? And we tend to neglect and overlook the things right in our own literal backyard.
Right.
Huh. That's absolutely fascinating. So obviously you've seen, I like that you threw in the Hopesville story, because Iowa's more than parks, because there are obviously natural forms and structures. As you've essentially, you might know every square inch of Iowa better than most people. So what are some other interesting locations, landforms, maybe museums or people you've met? And I can break those back out for you again. But what are some other ones that really come to mind?
I think a museum that I have been to that I thought was really well done. Again, I'm going back to the Les Hills, but it's the Harrison County Historical Village and Iowa Welcome Center. Has a really long name.
Good luck fitting that on a business card.
Yeah. And, you know, that one had been started by a private resident of Harrison County, and he just did a really nice job with his collection, and then was able to give it to the County Conservation Board, I think like in the 1960s or something. I probably have some of these dates wrong. But yeah, that was one where, you know, we just thought it was going to be this quick little bathroom break. And
oh, interesting.
And ended up spending a good hour and a half there, just, you know, wandering around and learning about the history of that county. And that was our first stop. So it was nice because then you kind of have a connection already to the place,
right?
You know, as you're driving through it and as you're going to some of the parks. So I think I would recommend that to folks, that if there is some kind of a museum or, you know, a historical village, a lot of times they do these historical villages, stop there first. And it can then kind of give you that sense of place.
Are there any surprising things you learned about just Iowa in general on this tour of this little state park mission that you were a little surprised to find out about?
I think I'm finding, especially after the pandemic, during the pandemic, people got out in parks.
Oh, that's good.
Parks were being used.
It's kind of the best antidote.
Like record levels.
Yeah.
You know, campgrounds were packed.
Really?
And yeah. But after that, I'm seeing a lot of empty parks.
Really? The interest is kind of dying down a little bit.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking, oh gosh, people, like, I feel like you were getting it right. Like you were getting it. Now just keep doing it, because there's so many benefits.
What is your like park strategy? Because I think most people are like, man, like some of these parks are very remote. Like, do you know, they're way out in the middle of nowhere. And I don't know where the nearest Marriott is. So, like, do you camp at a lot of these locations? Do you just sleep in your car? Do you just make the day trip and go and spend half the day there and just drive back late at night? Do you have like a strategy or a kit, maybe even a kit that you take with?
I wouldn't say I have a strategy, and it's a mixture. So we camped a lot when we did the state parks. But I'm finding maybe as I get older, plus we tent camp and I'm just kind of almost getting over that. There are a ton of really cool Airbnbs.
Really?
Oh,
All over the state?
all over the state.
Really? Wow.
You don't have to look too hard.
Sure.
Like a couple weeks ago, I took my daughter, and we stayed at this place called Best Nest Farm, just south of Glenwood, and stayed in a covered wagon.
Oh, that's cool.
So, I kind of try to mix it up. So, if it's, like 4 or 5 counties away, I'm definitely going to turn it into an overnight stay.
Sure. Yeah, makes sense.
If I can do it in a day, I will. But I try to get every park in a county and get it finished up before I would head home.
That's a good thought, because I kind of forgot, but I think it was months ago, we had the owner of Three Pines Farm, and it's essentially I don't know if they list on Airbnb or not. I can't remember that, but it's essentially part of the agritourism trend, which shockingly enough is growing here in Iowa, no pun intended. And so like this agritourism, all these Airbnbs popping up, really kind of have provided the structure and the foundation for Iowans to get out there and explore their state. And so I really appreciate you kind of encouraging Iowans and myself to explore more corners of the state. I know as I do this show, I'm like, wow, my list of locations to go to in Iowa just gets longer every week.
Right.
So I'm going to be in your position very soon where I'm like, I'm going to just not ever have to, if I'm going to check all this stuff off, I'm never going to be able to leave the state again in my life. Sally Ortgies, the Iowa Park Lady, thank you so much for coming on the Iowa podcast. What is the Instagram handle so people can follow you and get ideas of where to go from you? Yeah,
it's just on Instagram. It's Iowa Park Lady.
That's easy enough.
Yep. And I'm on Facebook too.
Oh, what's that? How do they find that?
Iowa Park Lady.
Oh, you got it all. Iowa Podcast has the Iowa Park Lady, Sally Ortgies. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's a pleasure to have you in the studio.
Of course. Thank you very much.
And to my fellow Iowans, Iowa expats, and Iowans at heart, thanks for listening and subscribing to the Iowa Podcast.